we're in July 1933, and right now, so Germany, really the Nazi government does not have international recognition. There is a bit of an outcry at what they're doing, and it is in this political environment that the Vatican signs a Concordant with Germany. Okay, so the Concordant was basically that the Christian church, well, the Catholic Church would maintain its autonomy, it would retain special rights, and this was orchestrated by Eugene Pacelli, who eventually became Pius XII, who would be the Pope during the war. Now, currently he's being discussed for the sainthood, and it's going to be important when we talk about what he did, but really more importantly what he didn't do, because he really didn't do anything during the war, and I think most Jewish groups are really not in favor of him being made a saint. But, excuse me?
The Jews have no say.
Obviously, but they're trying to point out, that this really isn't somebody, right, that would be, they're not saying Jewish groups don't say we don't believe in saints. They say more, if you are going to make somebody a saint, you would think it'd be somebody that, would not have really been silent during the Holocaust. That's what he's saying. That they're saying that he's not really deserving under their own criteria, right? They're not really getting involved in the faith-based aspect of it. Right? So this was really important because it gave Hitler international credibility, and this would be only the first time that he would get the best of international leaders. So really, almost immediately after this, Hitler began to break the Concordant right away. And most importantly, with the continued pursuit of euthanasia, but also with the harassment of priests and youth organizations. And this eventually would cause Pius XI in 1937 to issue the encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, which means with burning regret, lamenting German conduct. We're going to talk about it a little when we get to 1937. But and it's important that when he passed away, Pius XII did not continue Pius XI's really move away from Germany, because Pius XII believed that the real danger to Christianity was communism, and really focused much more on that. And he eventually would excommunicate all communists, but the Catholic Church would never excommunicate Adolf Hitler. Okay, even when they knew what he was doing, they never excommunicated him. Okay, so yes.
How come?
How come?
They never excommunicated him.
How come they didn't excommunicate him?
Too much like following?
So people say, generally people excuse his conduct for not doing anything, they say because he didn't want to endanger the Jews more, he didn't want to endanger Catholics in Germany. Why they didn't excommunicate him ever, I have no idea. I can't really answer that. The only thing is that they were much more... They say because he was trying to work behind the scenes, to work for peace, and he didn't want to he didn't want to get Hitler angry. But I don't know. In the face of what Hitler did, I don't think the answers really can adequately account for why he didn't do anything. Excuse me? Wait.
It's like the leaders just simply got them all riled up.
Yeah, I think the Pope is pretty much outside of that, right? So I still think that excuse wouldn't work. Okay, so let's now move on to youth organizations. So we talked about it a little before. So in 1936, we're skipping ahead a little, but all other youth organizations other than Hitler Youth were outlawed. Okay, by then. It had gone from, there were only 100,000 kids in Hitler Youth in 1932, and there were 10 million kids in other youth organizations. By 1938, it would be 8 million in Hitler Youth, and nobody was allowed anywhere else. So you notice that some kids were able to escape. So by March 1939, they made it that it was like conscription. When you hit a certain age, you entered Hitler Youth. When you hit a certain age, you entered the army. Okay, so it became exactly like the army, that if you were a German child, male child, you had to enter Hitler Youth. If you were a girl, you had other things. Like girls, at 18, they had to spend a year either working on a farm away from home or working in a household away from home.
How was that fulfilling?
Because it was they were doing their national service, like Sheirut Leumi almost. Yeah, it's called lanyard. Actually, a lot of moral problems arose. There were a fair bit of pregnancies out of wedlock. But some of the leaders of the female youth groups actually advocated that any type of pregnancy that can further the children for the Reich is useful. So they really, in terms of being able to control people's ideology and even people's future in terms of child rearing, this became a major drive from the Nazi leadership. On August 25th, 1933, as we talked about a little last week, there was a deal between the Economics Ministry and the Zionist organization to stimulate large immigration to Palestine. Okay, so the original plan of the Germans, various historians really disagree about whether the end goal of extermination actually was in Hitler's mind or German leadership's mind now. So it seems at this point really they just wanted to get all German Jews out of Germany. Okay, so they didn't really care where. They thought the best idea would be Palestine. Actually, in 1936, Eichmann went to Palestine disguised as a journalist to see the feasibility of making Jews leave. And he would actually work to try and do that up until the war. He really ran part of the, where he worked in the SS, their major goal was to get Jews to emigrate elsewhere. I don't know if you've heard that they tried to get them to go, tried to get Jews to go to Madagascar. We see also, we're going to mention that the Polish government also looked into forcing all Polish Jews out of Poland and sending them to Madagascar. Jews went to Argentina. So they really now you can only say that the goal is to make the Jews really extremely uncomfortable in Germany and try and force them to leave. Okay, so again, the march to get rid of Jews from most parts of business continued. September 22nd, Jews were banned from journalism, art, literature, music, and farming. Okay, so Jews were forced to sell their ownership of newspapers. There was one particular newspaper that was in the House of Ulstein, which was a Jewish firm, for over 230 years. Okay, and they'd had continuous daily publication for 230 years, and they were forced to sell. Okay. Some major newspapers were owned by Jews in Germany. In the end, over 1,000 daily newspapers closed as a result of this law. Okay, so Jews were actually extremely involved in journalism and then were expelled. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the laws. Now we're going to give a little insight into some of the physical and verbal attacks that happened. So mid-1933, so the attacks on Jews really began to increase. So it started with cities and towns posting signs about how Jews were unwanted. Okay, even in large towns like Munich. So there was a historian that traveled around at this time. This is what he had to say. He said, where formal decrees are lacking, placards on the highways leading to towns have the desired effect. Poets are encouraged to make announcements rhyme with sow, garlic, and stink. Artists have been given the opportunity to depict on the placard the fate of any Jews incautious enough to disregard this warning. These placards are universal in Hesse, Pomerania, there are other places that he mentions, and elsewhere in about half of the towns. Okay, railway stations, government buildings, and all major highways take up this refrain. In Ludwigshafen, a dangerous bend in the road bears the following advice to motorists. Drive carefully, sharp curve. Jews, 70 miles an hour. Okay, so they really started to, and this wasn't at the instigation of Nazi government. Okay, this was just people taking the initiative and wanting to, telling Jews really to leave. What?
Kill themselves.
Yes, in essence, that they wanted them gone or they wanted them dead. Okay? Some physical attacks, and this is going to continue throughout the war, were extremely symbolic. For example, cutting of payas and beards. Okay? Often when they would cut the beard, they would cut into the face. They wouldn't even just cut the beard. Right? They would really cut into the person. And again, this is really symbolic because in terms of what most people identified, that's my phone that's dying. I'll just turn it off. Usually it's just on low battery. Anyway, so again, this would be symbolic, right? The identification of Jews, specifically with religious Jews, and this would be their way of striking back against that. Okay? And you would think that this might only happen in cities where it wasn't necessarily that people had personal knowledge of the Jews that they were torturing, but it was more that they saw a Jew and they attacked them. But that's not the case, because this was also widespread in the countryside as well. People were persecuted by their neighbors. Just two examples. March 12, 1933, in the town of Gedern, there are 40 Jewish families. So the SA went through the town almost like a pogrom. They beat all the Jews. One Jew had to spend a full year in hospital. Okay. Later, when there was an election, there was a communist slogan written on a bridge. The Jews were forced to wash the graffiti off the buildings, which is something that, again, Jews would be forced to do later, like scrubbing roads with toothbrushes and things of that nature. And then they were beaten again. One young boy lost an eye. So, right, these are people that they know. Okay, so you have to say that the anti-Semitism, the violent anti-Semitism, was extremely widespread in Germany, and it wasn't just at the instigation of the Nazi government. It wasn't just Nazis doing this. Okay. Second example, in the town of Binzafen on March 27, 1933, the SA bludgeoned a Jew in front of his entire village, and they all gathered around and they cheered him on. Okay, and again, this is from Daniel Goldhagen's book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, and he says that these really are not atypical at all. Okay, he said that these really are par for the course, and that if he actually would recount all such instances, they would fill many volumes. Okay, so you have to remember, this is only 2 months after the Nazis have taken power. People haven't forgotten what a democratic government looks like. Okay, and they're taking advantage of the situation to carry out what really is their own feelings. It's not something that's been forced on them by the Nazi government. Okay, at this point in time, the SA is over 2 million men, which is 10% of the age cohort. Okay, so a large amount of the people agree, even with this kind of violent activity, and even the people that weren't part of the SA has been saying we're into this, because here's a Gestapo report from 1939 in the city of Osnabrück. In the city, massive demonstrations against Jewish businesses, which were publicly branded and surrounded by mobs. People who frequented Jewish businesses were photographed, and the pictures displayed in public. The streets were alive with action, with parades and so on. The situation became so inflamed, the Gestapo and other state officials had to put a stop to these individual actions. Okay, so sometimes the individual actions of the population were so extreme, and they activated and riled up the populace so much that the Gestapo themselves had to stop it. Okay, which is not something you would really think they would try and do. But again, they wanted it to be more controlled, because at this time they were trying really to, they weren't trying to flaunt international opinion so much. So they put a stop to it. Okay, and again, as we said, it's not just the lower classes that are doing it. We talked about what they did in universities. with Jewish science versus Nordic science, and even the classes in racial science, talking about what is a Jew by measuring things like their noses. So you can see this as an extremely widespread anti-Semitism that, again, like we talked about in the first classes, had been present in Germany long before the Nazis came around, and really was present in a lot of Europe. Okay, so now we're on to 1934. So on January 26th, Hitler signed a 10-year non-aggression pact with Poland. That's correct. 1939 is not 10 years after 1934. But he did sign a 10-year non-aggression pact with Poland, saying that they would not attack each other, which he kept. He did. So that really shocked the world, okay? Because Hitler had withdrawn from the League of Nations, but this really was his way of saying, even though I've left the League of Nations, I mean peace. He would do this consistently, and everybody really just wanted to believe him. Yeah.
The League of Nations, basically.
It was before the UN. It was just as powerful as it is now.
Was North America involved in it, or was it just Europe?
No, the US was not involved in it.
It was European.
Yeah, it was largely a European thing. You have to remember, most of the nations that are there now were really still owned by Europe, right? Still administered by Europe. So it was mostly European. But so the real intention of this was because Poland had an agreement with France. This was basically, again, to provide Germany with the fear of a two-front war, which Germany lost the first time. So Hitler's real goal was to separate France from Poland, and that way he could knock them off one at a time. Okay? So that's Hitler's biggest foray into international politics at this time. Okay? You have to remember, Britain and France still extremely... they're afraid to really say anything. And again, this policy of appeasement, which would continue further, as we're going to see. But internally, Hitler also had problems. If you recall, the SA was still powerful, and they had wanted to be incorporated into the army. They actually wanted to take control of the army. And Hitler really didn't want this to happen, because Hitler felt he needed the support of the army, because when Hindenburg died, he was afraid that the army would reinstitute the monarchy instead of letting him continue as chancellor, and he didn't want that, right? He wanted to be president, and he wanted to exert full power for as long as he could. So what he did was he made a deal with the army, okay? And this also worked out well because Göring and Himmler also wanted to get rid of the SA because they wanted to consolidate their own power. What Hitler did, as we saw earlier what he did when he was still dealing with inter-party politics, he would have very powerful subordinates, and he would give them their own, they had their own domains within the state. What he would do was he would make them equally powerful so that they would play off each other, so that nobody would unite to get rid of him. Okay, so again, there was a lot of infighting. It really is something you would never see, I guess, in the democracy in the same way. But they were all vying for their own little places where they could exert, their sovereignty, as it were. So on June 30th, they told Hitler that the SA was attempting a purge, which they actually were not. So what Hitler did was he ordered the rounding up of all SA leaders, and he wanted them to kill them. He wanted to let Ernst Röhm commit suicide because Röhm had been his friend, and he thought, let you die with honor. So what Röhm said was, if Adolf wants to do it, tell him to do it himself. Okay, so he didn't do it himself. He got other people to shoot him. But all in all, at least 400 people were killed. By some estimates, well over 1,000. So it wasn't just that they killed SA leaders. They took advantage of the situation, and they killed anybody that had crossed them. If you remember, Gregor Strasser and General von Schleicher were just two of the political people that they killed. By the way, once we're getting rid of people, we might as well get rid of all of them. and this became known as the Night of the Long Knives. Okay? What? Okay. So with this, the SA really passed out of being. On July 4th, the SS was given control of the concentration camps, with Theodor Eicke placed in charge. So this actually was worse for the people in it, because the SA had run the camps really not in any sort of orderly manner. Again, we talked about that they kind of ransomed prisoners off, they held them for ransom, and they abused prisoners. They whipped them and they beat them, and there were even some cases where they killed them by strangulation or through the whipping. But again, there was no real administration, and there was no, guiding plan to say, here's who we want to get rid of and here's who we not want to get rid of. It was much more on the spur of the moment. But again, this is really going to change because the SS was a much more organized organization. And I know it doesn't sound really good, but they were much more organized, and they were able to carry out things, I think, in a much more efficient manner than the SA would ever have been able to. Okay? On July 13th, Hitler explained why he had done the Night of the Long Knives, and he proclaimed, "If anybody reproaches me and asks why I did not resort to the regular courts of justice, all I say is this. In this hour I was responsible for the fate of the German people, and I thereby became the supreme judge of the German people." Okay, so at this moment Hitler took... He basically arrogated himself the power of life or death over every German. So this is really where Hitler proclaimed his supreme power. Okay? So now we can say that really Hitler would have no real internal problems again in terms of threatening to dethrone him from his position, but he did still have outward problems. On July 25th, Austrian Nazis killed the Austrian Chancellor in a bid to take over Austria. Now, if you remember, Hitler really wanted to take over Austria, and he would eventually, but he was forced to renounce this act because the Austrian government reacted too quickly and put them down. So he had to say, I didn't want to do that, I didn't support it. And in this way he averted, again, the catastrophe of internationally being seen as undermining other governments. Hitler's really trying to play it coy with everybody at this point. What he would continue to do, he continued to really trick everybody until it was too late. Okay, so Hindenburg died August 2nd. So after he died, a law was published that was from the day before he died, that Hitler was made president. Okay, it's a strange coincidence, but the law was from the day before he died, and it made Hitler president. Now this law actually completely... Yes? Hindenburg? No, Hindenburg died.
Was he older?
Yes. He was 85?
He died the next day.
Excuse me?
Was he died the next day?
No, he died, and then only after he died did they publish the law that was from the day before that Hitler was made president. Hindenburg had been the president, yeah. So the reason why they did this is because the law was actually illegal, because there was a part of the Weimar Constitution that no chancellor could be president at the same time.
What higher chancellor president?
Excuse me?
What higher chancellor president?
What do you mean?
President was like higher level now.
Yeah.
Chancellor was like what?
Well, the chancellor worked at the discretion of the president. So the president really, I'd say the president wasn't necessarily involved in the day-to-day movement of everything. But the thing is that Hitler could have been dismissed by Hindenburg at any time. Right? But he was much more afraid of the army taking power for themselves. He still didn't believe that he had power over the army. Yeah. So he was afraid that if he didn't get Hindenburg to make him president, then he would be deposed. Also, Hindenburg delivered his last will and testament to Hitler, and he asked that he publish it, that he really wanted the monarchy to be reinstated, but Hitler got rid of it so that they wouldn't know. He only published the part that Hindenburg said how good Hitler was. So he...
Why not that he didn't publish half of it?
They only found out after the war.
How? There's like a recording of it?
No, Franz von Papen said that he delivered it, and when he was at Nuremberg, part of his interrogation, he said that he delivered it and he doesn't know where it is. But a lot of the things that I'm saying, they didn't find out till after the war. A lot of it is actually recorded in German ministries. Like they record a lot. Like a lot of the phone calls that they have when they were taking over Austria, a lot of that they recorded themselves, the Germans, and they kept logs of it, and they only found it after the war. Yeah, so if you were living at that time, you didn't really have you wouldn't really know a lot of this was happening, aside from the laws, right? So Hitler took advantage of this, and he made the soldiers swear an oath of unconditional obedience, not to Germany, but directly to him. So any of you that watched the movie Valkyrie, that's the oath that they're taking at the beginning is the oath directly to Adolf Hitler. Now, the army would use this law to say that they were innocent of the crimes that they committed due to the fact that they were really just obeying Hitler. Okay? So the army did actually commit crimes. They actually did kill Jews. But they would say that all these atrocities were justified because they had to do them rather than break the oath. Okay? And they constantly came back to their code of honor. Now, how you reconcile that with you should have a code of honor not to kill innocent people is confusing. But they would actually use it, and the generals would use it not to make any plot to kill Hitler, really until the July 20th, 1944 plot was really the closest they got to killing him. But this is really what Hitler did. He took advantage of the army, and he co-opted the army into his plan. So September 4th, Hitler proclaimed that the Reich would last for 1,000 years, and you recall. And with this, in the next month, he ordered a massive build-up in the army and the navy. So that was really his I guess, the carrot that he used to lure the army in. Is he said, if you come with me, I'll make a much bigger army, I'll make a much more powerful navy, and you'll all get all the toys you want, and we'll actually use you. And he also announced the creation of the Air Force, which they did not have before. So, if you recall, Hitler actually was able to eliminate unemployment in Germany. Okay?
Completely?
What?
Completely?
Yeah. Like, I mean, obviously, I wouldn't say it was 0%, but really, what?
Minute%.
Yeah, it was a minute percent, and if you recall, it was over 10, it was over 20. So he brought it all the way down. So one of the ways that Hitler did this was because of the massive rearmament program. Okay? Also, was the building of the Autobahn, right? Anybody know what the Autobahn is?
Volkswagen, yeah, 200 mile per hour highway.
Yeah, they're highways with no speed limits, but they're highways all over Germany. Okay, so they got people to build those. Also Volkswagen, that's right, they did start the program to build the Volkswagen because Hitler wanted all people to have a car. Now, the only thing is that they didn't actually produce any cars before the war started, so they actually turned that facility into a facility for tanks and trucks. So no German actually saw a car out of that. It's actually interesting because a lot of they took a portion of their money, of workers' money, to put aside for the Volkswagen. So they actually lowered wages and kept some of the money. Okay, so the thing is workers actually lost their autonomy. Okay, because Hitler got rid of trade unions. He also said that you weren't allowed to, you couldn't leave a place of work if your employer didn't want you to. So you were completely tied to your work. Just like farmers also became tied to their land. So it was almost like a reinstitution of serfdom. But with that loss of autonomy, people were granted, they were guaranteed food, they were guaranteed money. Okay, so people, you have to say that the Germans accepted the loss of autonomy because they would rather have had something than nothing, right? One in hand is better than two in the bush, really. Okay, so some of the slogans they used for this were guns before butter. Okay, so just to get everybody involved. Okay, so that's really 1934. 1935, the Reichswehr was renamed the Wehrmacht, which means armed forces, which was really a direct acknowledgement that Hitler's war machine was bent on actually waging war. Conscription was introduced, but the British and the French took it as a defensive measure, so they didn't react at all. But Jews were banned from the army. Okay, so Jews are not allowed to be in the army. On June 26th, the euthanasia law was extended to force abortion.
It's just Jews or all minorities?
Just Jews. So June 26th, the euthanasia law was extended to force abortion of up to 6-month fetuses, if they were unfit in any way. Okay, so this is forced abortion. Now, yes?
So you have to get the parents from that?
I'm assuming it would mean the parents were unfit, because that's the thing. I don't think they had the technology necessarily to say that the fetus was unfit. I think it's more that the parents were mentally ill. So what do you guys think was the most important law promulgated in 1935?
Prescription?
No. What pertaining to Jews?
What was the Nuremberg?
Yeah, Nuremberg laws were in 1935. Okay, so how many major Nuremberg laws were there?
Four?
Yes. There were two. Okay, so the first one was the Fri Apr citizenship law. That's one people don't really know so much about. It distinguished between citizens and subjects. And Jews, correct, they were no longer citizens. So this is emancipation fully revoked. Okay, Jews lived at the whim of the German government. Okay, so this basically got rid of 100 or so years. In Germany, it got rid of 100 years of social freedom.
So what can they not do, President?
Well, they don't have any rights.
What did they have before?
Did they have before? I mean...
What's happening right now in like Hungary and Poland?
So we're going to actually talk about that more in 1936, but their anti-Semitism was quite popular there as well. There's also anti-Semitism in America. A lot of stuff I've left out some of that stuff, but there is definitely a large amount of anti-Semitism in America. I can just mention one part of it quickly now. Yeah, in 1936, so America's foremost Protestant journal argued that Christians should ignore Jewish suffering because they deserve it for the denial of Jesus. Okay? That's in America.
Is there anywhere there wasn't anti-Semitism?
Your country, I told you Jews.
I know, but like things.
In the country, I told you Jews.
Like in Denmark.
Denmark.
I don't know. Indonesia has anti-Semitism. How many Jews do you know have ever lived in Indonesia?
No, during the Holocaust, I told you Jews.
There were Jews that went to China, right? The Mir Yeshiva went to Shanghai,
Yeah.
right?
Didn't Denmark smuggle out?
Yeah, so Denmark really was the best. They smuggled out all their Jews. No, a random country? I gave you a country. Denmark, when Jews were forced to wear the yellow star, the king wore a yellow star also. So yeah, I would say Denmark was the best to its Jews. Yeah, but what rights didn't they have? Well, they were considered foreigners. They could be, right, just start getting ready to expel them. I guess they would lose all the government I guess, subsidiaries that they would get for being Germans. They would lose all that. I don't know if that necessarily had an immense tangible impact. I think it's more the intangible impact. You're completely without a state now. You're landless. You're a completely landless person. So your position becomes very precarious, right? Because you're really at the whim of somebody else. You have no actual control. You're not assured that you're guaranteed a place. So I would say that would be the worst part of it. But the second law is the law that people know most about. It was called the Law for Protection of German Blood and Honor. Okay? So marriage between Germans and Jews were prohibited, punishable by a prison term. But not just marriage, extramarital relations were also forbidden. And also for the first time, Germany defined what a full Jew was. So what is a full Jew? Huh? No, well, it's more on the basis of Jewish grandparents. Okay, how many Jewish grandparents?
One.
No.
One.
No.
Two.
No.
Three. One.
Yeah, 3.
Oh.
Full Jew. Hold on. A full Jew is defined as having at least 3 Jewish grandparents. If only 2 Jewish grandparents, and if you did not practice Judaism or have a Jewish spouse, you would be classified as a Mishlinge, which means crossbreed. Okay? So it's not like if you were part of this secondary category you weren't discriminated against as well, but not as much.
Your father's grandparents are the one.
No, they didn't care. That wasn't, yeah. Right, if you have 3 though, you have to have one of each, right? So definitely it didn't really matter where it was from. But you see already that, again, so the law is that Jews are a race, but at the same time it incorporates that if you practice the religion. So what really are you going against? Are you going against do you think it's a race? Do you think it's a religion? Actually, interestingly, I don't know if any of you guys read the paper ever, but in the National Post this week, there's a court case in Britain. There's a Jewish kid whose mother underwent a progressive conversion. And what?
JFS.
Yeah, and he wanted to go to JFS. Yeah, see, somebody reads the paper. And they sued them, and they went to court, and the Court of Appeals said that Judaism is a race, and it's an ethnicity, and that it doesn't matter whether the religion believes in matrilineal lineage or not. Okay? Huh? JFS, it's a school in England that they get support from the government. That's really why. That's why. But basically the government just defined what's a Jew, and that sounds a lot more like this than an actual Orthodox, I guess, view on what a Jew constitutes. Also brings in interesting questions about how can you have freedom of religion if you're going to have the government tell you who's part of your religion and who is not. So just thought that you guys should think about it, because those kind of things are happening now. Not saying that they're trying to do something that happened in Germany, but I'm just trying to say that the same questions about what is a Jew are still actually being debated now in courts in Britain. Now, Mishlinge would actually be separated into first and second degrees. Okay, second degree is with only 1 Jewish grandparent and you're non-practicing. So again, you see that an important facet of who they define as a Jew is also your Jewish practice. Now, Mishlinge were able to remain in the army, and actually some would be decorated for bravery, which would lead to problems for Hitler when he tried to say that, Jews are vile, subhuman creatures that have no redeeming human qualities, and yet he's decorating them as brave German soldiers. So that was a Gordian knot that he had to tie, that he had to cut, but he did. Anyway, there were 250 to 500,000 Mishlinge in Germany. And also they weren't allowed to marry full Jews. Okay, so there was a law, so full Jews really couldn't full Jews couldn't marry anybody from mixed race people and down. Okay? Now, how did the population feel about this? So there's a Gestapo report that says the population regards regulation of relationship with Jews as an emancipatory act, which brings clarity and simultaneously greater firmness in the protection of the racial interests of the German people. Okay, so the German people were fully behind this. There was no expression of outrage. Really, the people who caused most problems for would be Germans married to Jews, right? They were the ones that really had the most problems because they had to deal with the fact that their marriages had just been declared illegal, right? In February 1936, a Gestapo report said that the general populations feel about these laws that it is said that the Jews in Germany are still treated much too humanely. Okay, so even with all this, Germans feel it is not going far enough. Okay? On November 15th, 1935, German churches collaborate with the Nazi government by supplying records to the government. Why is this bad?
Records of what?
Like pastoral records, yeah. Of who's part of their church and who's not. Like lineage stuff. Yeah, because basically they're providing easy information to the government about who's a Jew and who's not. This is also going to happen in occupied countries during the war, though the Germans actually sometimes did it in an intelligent way. They got everybody to register themselves.
So it's like a membership thing in churches then?
Right. If you're part of the church, you have your lineage, you know, marriages in the church.
Why would Jews join the church and not show up?
Well, so the problem is that, right, like guys like us wouldn't join a church before then. So if we joined after, they would know, right? So unless you had, unless you had years in advance the foresight to join a church, it wouldn't help you. Also, from the way it seems that people really didn't necessarily have any compunction informing on other people. So if you wouldn't have looked like a real enough Christian to these people, they would have informed on you. So that probably wouldn't have helped you anyway.
And how did it work? If you weren't, there's like one church, or they went to like all the churches?
No, all the churches.
So if they went to all, and if you were part of any church, you were classified as Jewish?
Yeah. Well, no, it wasn't classified as Jewish, I would say. I think, but I don't think it's so popular then. First of all, you have to remember this isn't necessarily even practice. If they know that your parents belong to a church, even if you're not practicing Christian, it's not like they take attendance at church, okay? Right? They recorded. That's right. Not like Yeshiva. They recorded marriages, they recorded births, okay? So if you were in any way under the auspices of any church at all, they would know about it. Right? Okay? So again, this is something that the German churches did not have to do. It's interesting that they did it because of all the problems that the Nazis were giving the churches at this time, yet they did it anyway. I would say probably none, or an extremely minuscule number. There were Muslims in Europe would be in Bosnia, where they still are now, actually, and Albania. Well, so most of the Muslims that are in France now are from Algeria or Tunisia, which were former what? Spain. A lot of those are Pakistani.
Spain.
Yes. No, so it's interesting if you look at, I assume that the nationalities of people in these countries actually, Algeria and Tunisia used to be French or Italian, right? Okay? In Britain, India and Pakistan used to be British. Okay? So people migrate to places where they have some sort of familiarity. Okay? Now, in December 1935, Himmler established the Race and Settlement Central Office and the Lebensborn maternity homes. Okay, so the Race and Settlement Central Office would be principally the SS would use, when they would have massive resettlement projects once the war started. They would try and move ethnic Germans they wanted to establish ethnic German colonies in occupied places like Poland. Okay? So this was the start of that office. And the Lebensborn maternity homes is for the looking after of racially and genetically valuable German mothers. So this is basically a maternity home where you can raise the next generation of little Nazis, essentially. So you can say that they really aspire to take control and administer every level of German life. And here really is just for the looking after of the best of the best crop, so that they can raise them into future leaders. Also, it's interesting, and also with Hitler Youth, they had special schools called Adolf Hitler schools, where they sent special candidates who were especially fanatical. They had what were called order castles, where they would send kids away for 6 years, away from their families for 6 years.
6 years.
What?
War's only 6 years.
What do you mean?
1939.
No, so they started it early, right? Okay, and they would. It was like they use like old German mythology, like the Teutonic Knights, and they would indoctrinate them essentially. And it's important, I think, because later in the war, primarily when they needed to use them in 1944 and 45, when they used Hitler Youth soldiers, they were actually the most fanatical. They were the worst to fight against for Allied troops. There was a massacre of American captured prisoners during the Battle of the Bulge, and there was one of Canadians a couple days after D-Day, and they were both done by Hitler Youth units. Okay, so this is really where they got indoctrinated from here. Also, it's interesting that the Pope now was in the Hitler Youth. Anyway, just yeah. You have a question? No? Okay. Any questions before we go on? Okay. One more. Okay. So some of you.
By the Night of the Long Knives, what was the purge that the SD was trying to do?
Well, so the SA had kept saying they wanted to. You mean why the SS got rid of the SA, or what the SA was going to
trying to do?
So the SA they were much more socialist than Hitler actually turned out to be. So they wanted more power to the proletariat, and they wanted to get rid, particularly people in the SA, they came from lower classes, so they weren't the aristocratic part of the army, right? The officer class was very aristocratic. They wanted to get rid of that, and they wanted to be in power in the army. That's primarily what they wanted.
Purging officers?
So they wanted to get rid of the army. So what the purge was the SS, and the army didn't want to do it themselves, so they got the SS to get rid of the SA for them. Okay? So really it was the army colluding with the SS. So you guys asked before about anti-Semitism elsewhere in the world. Yeah, question? What? Oh, okay. So in Romania, members of the Iron Guard, so these guys would come to power after the war started. They bombed the Jewish theater in 1936. So we talked about America. If you remember the Polish primate August Holland, his speeches against Jewish usury and interest slavery, and how you can't be violent to Jews, but they're evil. So those speeches actually triggered pogroms in Poland, where Jews were killed. A man named Leon Blum, who eventually became the premier of France, who was Jewish. At this point in time, the slogans against him in France, you have to remember, France is extremely frightened of a militant Germany. But the slogans against this Jewish politician was "Better Hitler than Blum." Okay? So that's that. And in April 1936, the Arabs rioted in Jaffa, killing over 10 Jews in protest of Jewish immigration. And this would cause the British to severely curtail immigration. And this would prove to be extremely costly. And this is really when Mossad Aliyah, they had to start trying all those things where they go in secret. They just put people on the beach and things of that nature. But this is really what started. Once the Arabs voiced their dislike, that was really they weren't willing to risk the anger of the Arabs. Okay. And actually, I mention it now. In 1937, the British had commissioned something called the Peel Commission to look into basically how to split up Palestine. And the recommendation was an Arab and a Jewish state, side by side, separated by a mandated area around Jerusalem and Nazareth. The Arabs turned it down. The Jews said yes. The Arabs turned it down and said that there needs to be one Arab state, and the Jews are allowed minority rights like they're afforded in Arab countries, which is essentially second-class citizenship. So they, so again, to the Arabs, that's again in the news now, right? Obama said that the Jews, that Israel shouldn't be allowed to build the settlements that they're building in Gilo, which is in East Jerusalem, which originally was given to the Jewish part of the state and captured by the Jordanians, but now it's over the Green Line, so it has to go back. Again, so they're saying you can't build it, you're destroying the peace process. But again, you see that time and time again, the Arabs would be offered a state, they're offered a state now, they'd be offered a state in 47. They said no, and they made their decision to go the other way. And I think that most people ignore that, and it's a very important facet of what needs to be considered when we talk about the peace process. Anyhow, so now we're into 1936. Hitler has carried out a large amount of the anti-Jewish legislation that he's going to give. Now he moves on to more. He's going to move on to more concrete measures. And you can see that anti-Semitism is prevalent elsewhere in Germany, elsewhere in the world, and the countdown to war has begun. And we will continue with that next week.